Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the EU Spectator, where we delve deep into the pivotal issues shaping the European Union today. I'm thrilled to be your host as we embark on a journey through some of the most pressing topics on the continent. In today's episode, we have back our special guest, who is no stranger to the intricacies of European affairs. Please join me in welcoming my friend and estimate colleague, Nicholas Zalewski. Nicholas is not only an expert in European matters, but also a PhD candidate at the prestigious University of Napoli, Federico II, bringing a wealth of knowledge and insightful perspectives to our discussion. So, Nick, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. And for everyone, remember to just subscribe to the YouTube channel and leave comments on this episode of the podcast, both whether you agree or disagree with our thoughts on the
Of
various issues.
Of course. So, we begin our conversation with Italy's economic recovery. Italy, cornerstone in the European economy, has faced significant challenges in recent years, from the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic to structural economic issue. The path to recovery, it's complex and multi-phased. Nicholas will provide us with a comprehensive analysis of the current state of Italy economy, the government's recovery strategies, and why not the broader implication for the European Union. But I know that his expertise will help us understand the potential opportunities and potential obstacles that lie ahead for Italy and how they will impact the wider European landscape. Next, we will explore the Christian culture heritage of Europe, a topic that resonates deeply with the historical and culture fabric of the continent. Europe's rich Christian heritage has significantly influenced its art, philosophy, and social values. In a time of increasing secularization and cultural diversity, we will discuss how this heritage continues to shape contemporary Europe. Nicholas, with his extensive knowledge in European studies, will guide us through the historical significance and the modern day relevance of these cultural roots, shedding light on the ongoing dialogue between tradition and progress in Europe. And our third focal point will be the upcoming NATO summit, a critical event for the security and strategic alignment of the member states, with geopolitical tensions on the rise and the landscape of international relations constantly evolving. The summit promised to be a landmark gathering. Nicholas will offer his predictions and insights on the key issues like to dominate the agenda, the potential outcomes and their implications for both NATO and the European Union. Stay tuned as we navigate these compelling topics with my friend Nicholas Zalewski, whose depth of knowledge and passion for European affairs promise to make this episode of the EU Spectator both informative and engaging. Whether you're a seasoned follower of European politics or a curious newcomer, today's discussion will offer valuable insights and provoke thoughtful reflection on the current state and future trajectory of the European Union. So, our first subject, as I said, it's Italy's economic recovery, a topic that has been at the forefront of European discussions, especially during the EU elections. Italy, with its rich history and significant economic influence, it's a key player, a key actor in the European Union. The country has faced numerous challenges from the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to long-standing structural issues with its economy. However, there have been recent signs of recovery, and the strategies employed by the government have sparked much debate and analysis. To help us navigate this complex issue, we turn to Nicholas Zalewski, whose expertise in European affairs will provide us with a deeper understanding of Italy's current economic landscape. So, Nicholas, thank you for joining us today. Let's start with a broader overview. So, what are the primary factors driving Italy's economic recovery, and how effective have the measures implemented by the government been so far?
It absolutely seems like Meloni has been focusing on encouraging investors into the nation, where we're definitely seeing just trying to entice people and bring them back, where before investors were scared off because of the ever seemingly increasingly rising debt that just kept on going up and up and kept on getting exasperated with the first economic crisis, then another one, and then another one, and then with COVID. But now we're seeing it finally declining and stabilizing. Hopefully more efforts will be taken in order to further decrease it. But with anyone who knows anything about Italy, part of the problem is with the black labor market, where people aren't necessarily paying taxes on the income they're earning, and employers trying to hire people under the table where then they don't have to pay various benefits. This is one of the challenges for Italy, but at the same time, it's definitely showing signs of less people having to work in these terrible conditions, considering how much the unemployment rate has declined. In April, unemployment was 6.9%, which was the lowest in 15 years. This is very significant considering how many nations currently in the European Union are seeing their unemployment actually increase. So before, Italy was the third worst in the EU, and now actually it has a lower unemployment rate than 7 other member states, including France. So this is a significant development. And it's also important to keep in mind that it seems like, unfortunately, some member states aren't necessarily being completely honest about unemployment, such as Germany. Because it's very bizarre how Germany reports to Eurostat, oh, we have an unemployment rate of 3.2%. And then I constantly see German economists quoting a 5.9% unemployment rate right now, which would actually be pretty close to Italy, a 1 percentage point difference. So yeah, sometimes it seems that Italy, because it's being more truthful than other member states, also makes it a little less appealing than investors, where Germany's reporting two different unemployment rates. And I try to find a reasonable explanation why this is, that you and such a big difference too. You know, it's one thing if you had an estimate where one, for example, was at 3.2 and another was at 3.4, but come on, almost a 3 percentage point difference. That's a huge variation. And definitely the tourism industry has helped its economic recovery, where especially the fact that now and tourists are slowly going to other parts of Italy that they previously didn't go. And this is partly because not only Meloni, but former governments such as Conte, where different investments in the transportation industry really connecting different cities better. So, for example, we should hopefully finally see, thanks to the Next Generation EU plan, we should see Naples connected to Bari, which is important because these are two of the largest cities in southern Italy, and could definitely help with economic growth, with better connection among South, which are still the weaker regions economically speaking. And not only that, but hopefully it will actually occur, the plan to connect Sicily to Calabria, which many Italians unfortunately don't have much hope until they actually see the bridge built, because this realistically has been talked about for decades. I mean, we're talking what, 40 or 50 years. Oh yeah, we'll connect Sicily and Calabria with a bridge. And then it keeps on getting axed. Now it's brought back on the table. Let's hope it actually sticks. And then another connection that finally, instead of ending the high-speed trains in Salerno, it will then run to Reggio Calabria. And then even on the island of Sicily, what many people might not realize is that Sicily is the largest region of Italy by land, and it's also the only region of Italy with 3 metro cities. So there's 14 where they're considered metropolitan cities in Italy, and 3, Palermo, Catania, and Messina, are all in Sicily. And now they'll finally be connected by a train. Unfortunately, it's not going to be high-speed rail by the definition of the European Union because it keeps on raising the minimum speed, but at the same time, still, we're talking a great reduction and actually connecting the cities, which should definitely help Sicily's economic growth as well, which is really important. Um,
Yeah,
it's also important to remember that when a
sorry,
lot of people, yeah,
sorry, because we should mention that I have some data from
yeah, yeah,
Istat, from the Italian National Institute of Statistics, and according to recent data from Istat, the Italian economy grew by 3.9% in 2023, a notable
yeah.
rebound from the contraction experienced during the pandemic year.
No, and it's important that people realize that the nations that not only Italy, but Spain, Portugal, Greece, that were previously really struggling before, they're now becoming some of the growth engines in Europe, while Germany's stagnating. And I think it's important when people are a bit critical still of these nations, thinking, oh, but look at their high unemployment. Oh, well, you know, yes, for example, anyone familiar with some economics, the theory is that unemployment rate should be between 3 and 5%. So yes, 6.9 still on the higher end, but let's be realistic. We always right now, oh, Germany, Germany, Germany. Germany was the like Italy in 2005. It had an unemployment rate of 11%, and yet magically everyone forgot about that. So it's important to realize that yes, while Italy's still on the track of recovery, it's still doing much better where it keeps on meeting these expectations. So for example, this year it was estimated that Italy would have an unemployment rate of maybe 7.7%, and yet it already hit 6.9, and there's no sign that all of a sudden it's going to dramatically start increasing again because the economy's still going in the right direction. So I think people sometimes really need to stop underestimating the southern EU member state economies as much as they have been. Italy's the third largest economy in the European Union, and it's definitely showing major signs of recovery, while Germany, on the other hand, could possibly be looking at a painful decade of stagnation.
Yeah,
The fact
and
that
we should.
it hasn't remained competitive, where it's so bizarre because for a while there, it recovered from 2005 when it had such a high unemployment, where then it became, where it was the sick man of Europe. Now it's becoming the sick man of Europe again. And part of the issue is that it had this period where it was really innovating, and it definitely then took the crown, justly so, of not only being the largest economy in the EU, but one of the wealthiest. But thanks to innovation, but all of a sudden it stopped innovating, where it just seemed that there was this period of cockiness that nobody could beat Germany. And now also the issue too, partially, was that people wrongfully underestimated China, where yes, China has many economic challenges, but at the same time, we should not underestimate China, where for the longest time, so many people would say that, oh, well, China doesn't have the capacity to innovate, they only copy other nations, which partially was true, but at the same time, we're seeing China starting to innovate and really compete with Germany economically, where it's taken over various sectors where Germany was the king, and now it's losing out, where China has learned how to innovate, and for some reason, Germany just stuck in place. And part of the issue too is it just also might partially be because that while Italy is now used to higher energy costs, Germany raised its energy costs significantly by closing down the nuclear energy plants. One of the
Mhm.
largest mistakes that Germany could have made. But that's what the current government did, and who knows if they'll ever be reopened, because as you know, once you close something down, it's hard to come back several years later and then reopen it. It could require a massive investment, and part of the issue is that uh, one of the benefits too is that the Italian government is definitely making smarter investments where, yes, its spending is a little bit higher than it really should be if it wants to bring down that public debt. But at the same time, it's at least making smart investments, such as trying to connect Naples to Bari, having the high-speed trains go all the way from Milan to Reggio Calabria instead of stopping in Salerno, while the German government unfortunately bound itself constitutionally where it can't spend at a deficit, which now we're seeing. I don't know if you just saw a few days ago that a report came out that so much of Germany's infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. A lot of the bridges are in trouble. The Autobahn could even be falling apart. And yet, the issue is that even though these are smart investments, it wouldn't be a dumb thing for the German government to spend additional money, but because it bound itself by that amendment several years ago that, oh, you can't spend at a deficit, well, because the economy is not growing like it used to, now it's hard to make any investments. And this is really where we're going to see the German economy falling by the wayside. And if the biggest lesson that if anybody could remember from the economic crisis was we made a horrible mistake with Greece. It is not better to just cut spending so significantly that then you have no money to do necessary things. So, for example, when people were angry a few years ago, when all those students died with the train accident because Greece wasn't allowed to spend money on necessary repairs for train infrastructure. Now we are seeing where Germany, to be honest, though, it's a bit of karma. It's almost like the German government does deserve this a little bit because of what they did to Greece. Now they're experiencing the same thing, where now they're going to have a long period of economic difficulty if they don't undo that constitutional amendment in order to spend at a modest deficit. It's one thing if they want to obey the EU, because, for example, you're not supposed to, you can't exaggerate where the EU has its own restrictions on how much of a deficit you should be able to spend at. But now Germany's at the issue where, oh, well, we have to have a perfectly balanced budget, which, as you know, it's hard to do, especially one. And now it's running into this period where it doesn't have the extra money like it used to. And now it should spend a little extra money in order to get its economic engine going again, but it can't because it constitutionally bound itself. And that's the benefit that Italy didn't do that. And hopefully Italy never does that. It's one thing if Italy takes some measures to try to slow down that excessive government spending a little, but at least it's now spending money on smarter decisions, where now Germany bounds itself where it just can't.
Yeah, and of course, we should recognize that this growth of Italy's economy is driven by a combination of increased consumer spending, a
Yes.
rebound in tourism, and a substantial government stimulus package aimed at revitalizing the economy. And additionally, as you mentioned, the European Union's Next Generation Recovery Fund has played a crucial role, providing Italy with approximately 191 euro billions to support its recovery efforts. But also the government's focus on digitalization, green energy, and infrastructure development has indeed yielded positive outcomes for Italian economy. For example, the Italian government has made significant investments in renewable energy projects aiming to reduce the country's carbon footprint and transition to a more sustainable economy. And furthermore, the digital transformation initiatives have improved the efficiency and competitiveness of Italian businesses, contributing also to economic growth. These efforts align with the broader objectives of the European Green Deal and the digital strategy, positioning Italy as a key player in a European sustainable future. But however, the performance of Giorgia Meloni's government in certain critical areas such as transportation, as you mentioned, energy infrastructure, and trade with Africa has been a subject of criticism. Despite the positive strides in some sectors, the transportation infrastructure remains a significant bottleneck. Many of Italy's roads, bridges, and rail networks are in dire need of modernization. And this particular issue, focusing on the current administration, how would you assess the performance of Giorgia Meloni's government in handling the economic challenges?
To be fair, part of it too also goes though to the regional and local public administration officials, where that's the issue, where we're definitely seeing an approval in the transportation, but it's also hard to entirely blame her for the state of the roads. One, this is what happens when governments for the past 50 years did not plan for the renewal of this infrastructure. And that's the issue, where at least we're definitely seeing an approval with the connections, and hopefully she does actually make that bridge happen between Sicily and Calabria, because that would be a huge accomplishment and show that her government's able to bring the nation on the right track. But to be honest, at least I'm also a little more hopeful for them than Germany, because Germany's in the same boat, but now they're not going to be able to spend the money on any infrastructure, while Italy at least is trying to put funds towards renewing that infrastructure. But it's also just the issue of rooting out corruption with local officials, where if they misuse funds or hire the wrong people for the job, because that's the thing. With some of these projects, sure, it's definitely more on the national government, but with some of these more minor projects, we can't ignore that local and regional officials also play a major role in not helping this infrastructure be maintained. And that's part of the issue, where it seems that everyone wants to blame the national government, blame the fact that it has to prioritize defense spending once again because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, where different Italians will comment on social media, oh, no spending money on weapons. Okay, but Italy spends less than many NATO member states. So it's not necessarily because of that, but it's because of the corruption that was allowed to persist long before Meloni took office. To be brutally honest, I think more of her issues lead more to the social factors, where people still are a bit critical of her, where, the fact that she never married, she had a kid out of wedlock, but here she is insisting on traditional family. Well, traditional family based off of whose definition? Because traditional family based off of religion and the Catholic Church, which seems to be more what she would be married parents who stick it out thick and thin. And then with Africa, it's also just trying to stop the flow of illegal immigration. But at the same time, it's important to remember that that's not only on her, because unless Italy were to leave different international agreements, there's only so much it could do to prevent people from arriving, where that's more on the European Union itself, where the European Union has been unwilling to take action, unwilling to work with different North African governments, saying, oh, well, well, they're not perfectly democratic. Well, okay, but there's not necessarily a perfect democratic government in Europe. I mean, I want to look more into the story, but I did see a comment where people are upset because someone was gang raped in Germany, and a woman who criticized one of the participants got more prison time than 8 out of the 9 men involved in the gang rape. are we going to pretend that Germany is a perfect democratic nation if you're going to punish someone more for criticizing rapists than men who don't know how to act like proper men in Europe? And yet we keep on using this excuse as, well, we shouldn't work with the governments in North Africa because they're not perfectly democratic. Well, look at the repercussions that Europeans are facing because of this. We're seeing with such horrific crimes happening. And it's interesting looking at Italy itself, because one of the encouraging things when looking at Italy, when people are concerned about immigration, looking at legal immigration, it's relatively roughly similar imprisonment rate to that of Italians, where most of the imprisonment of foreigners in Italy is people who illegally enter the country. So when that's definitely the main concern that the EU has to realize. Well, okay, definitely it could encourage legal immigration if it wants to, based off of needs for the labor market and the interests of voters and national governments. But it has to stamp out this illegal immigration because it's having a major negative impact on member states. The fact that in Italy, 60 to 80% of foreigners, depending on the crime, who are convicted of each crime in Italy, 60 to 80% of the foreigners convicted right now in Italian jails, they enter the country illegally. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. But going back a bit to the economy, one thing that people also need to be a little less critical of is when they see the unemployment rate increasing in regions like Campania and Calabria. And the reason why I say that is because the employment rate has also been increasing. And it's almost beneficial seeing the unemployment rate increasing in these regions is because it shows that workers want to leave the black market. They want to have a normal job. They want to be able to have a job that pays contributions, entitles them to a pension, where you're seeing more workers trying to get out of these horrific labor conditions, where it's beneficial than what people think, where yes, we're temporarily going to see some regions where the unemployment rate will increase before coming back down, but you're still seeing more people in the regulated workforce. And another thing that we need to keep in mind too, that I is interesting and kind of unfair, is the fact that how we look at the gender employment, where we keep on talking
Okay.
about how Italy has the largest gap, but it's not fair to judge Italy compared to the Netherlands because of how much higher of a percentage. 60% of women in the Netherlands only work part-time. This is compared to 30% in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why is it, if an Italian woman is in the situation where she could stay home, raise the kids, do we really need to encourage her to get a part-time job just for the sake of these statistics? I mean, if I want to do more of an analysis, but it could almost be that a higher percentage of Italian women are actually working full-time than in the Netherlands, because double the percentage in the Netherlands work part-time compared to in Italy. So it's kind of disingenuous to try to say, oh, well, look, Italy's behind on that scale. And it's like, okay, but at the same time, I also know that talking, you know, casual interviews with different women I know in Italy, part of it is because they didn't feel the need. And they made it clear, oh, it's not because my husband's telling me that I can't work. It's just that because we're in a financial situation where if they live in a smaller town in Italy, uh, and they don't need that extra money,
Mm-hmm.
and she's able to spend more time on activities she enjoys. So I'm thinking of this one that I talked to, who I knew personally. She enjoyed spending more time cooking and homemaking.
Yeah, but
Why tell her that, oh, well, no, you should work part-time just for the sake of these statistics to meet this arbitrary EU goal?
mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, and I totally agree with you. But let's have a look a little bit on the Italy's trade relations, because it's very interesting. Italy's trade relation, particularly with Africa, and you mentioned that, you
Well,
highlighted.
yeah, but part of the issue with the trade relations is that it also goes to the European Union. the fact that
Hmm.
the European Union controls international trade agreements. So
Right.
that's the issue with Italy, where even though Italy, because it borders North Africa, that it would be definitely one of the nations that would want to increase trade.
Yeah,
And
let
look,
explain let explain to our watchers and listeners why it's important for Italy to have a particular trade relation with African nations, and what's the EU role in this relation.
well, yeah, you could explain more with the role, but I'll just explain that particularly when looking with northern African nations,
Yeah.
particularly with Libya, the fact that Italy struck an energy deal,
Hmm.
because the fact that a large percentage of Italians still are against nuclear energy, the fact that Italy doesn't necessarily have a large domestic supply of energy. I mean, one of the areas where there could be is off the coast of Puglia, but a lot of Pugliese are concerned about potential environmental disasters that could happen with drilling in the sea, but it could have that potential with Libya, but at the same time, there's this concern because of the fact that there's not a single government that fully controls Libya yet. But the part of the issue with Italy is that it at least wants to normalize relations with the government that has United Nations approval, the one where it definitely is trying to normalize and improve conditions for Libyans again. I mean, this is a horrific, essentially, civil war that's been going on where you're having these factions fighting against each other and it's just not getting better. And then with the European Union, not necessarily lending support and pushing its support behind the government with UN backing, Italy could only do so much. And what people need to realize is, which is a common mistake that U.S. politicians even mistake. Where this is definitely one of the issues that people joke with Donald Trump, but
Hmm.
he's not the only one. Many American politicians fail to realize that. So, for example, if you want to come up with a trade agreement with an EU member state, well, you have to negotiate it with the entire bloc. And this is one of the benefits for the EU, the fact that definitely with being smaller geographically, the European Union for these nations, the fact that it's better for them to negotiate trade altogether because it improves their chances of getting a more favorable trade agreement. The fact that it's 27 member states with the correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we're talking by purchasing parity, it's the third largest economy after the United States and China. When you're combining all 27 member states rather than forcing little Malta to negotiate trade agreements by itself and just kind of throwing it to the wolves, the fact that it's all 27 member states. So the fact when you put Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, and then Malta all together, it gives them much more leniency and more leverage to try to get conditions that they want. But the issue is that one, you have some other member states not necessarily sure if they want to negotiate with North Africa because of issues that they're not running their nations perfectly, but at the same
Hmm.
time, they should also keep in mind that look at Turkey. The European Union constantly gives money to Turkey in order to help it keep refugees out of Europe and within Turkey. And Erdogan's not a democratic leader. I mean, look at the recent election where because an opposition party won in an area where it's mainly Kurds, they waited until after the election to try to say, oh, well, no, 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 he can't be mayor. Well, why didn't you say that before the election? Well, because Erdogan wanted to then force someone who was a member of his party to then be a mayor of that city.
Hmm.
I am just like, and that's the issue that the European Union has kind of reconcile with, well, why are they accepting the poor behavior of some nations and then not other? I mean, and also look at China. European Union is interested in working with China. It might potentially allow the electric vehicles in, although there's also complaints about how it's violating free competition with the fact that with different subsidies it gives, but still, at the same time, China's not a democratic nation.
Right.
You have the Communist Party that decides everything for everyone. Your everyday Chinese citizen doesn't have a voice in their government, so why do we excuse that compared to North African nations? And I definitely understand where North African nations get upset with the West and saying, well, okay, why do you treat us differently?
Yeah, and for me, it is clear that continued investment and strategic policy making and effective governance are crucial for Italy to fully realize its economic potential and contribute to the stability
That
of.
and for African nations themselves, because I definitely enjoyed this one class about
Mhm.
democratization in my university at Urbana-Champaign back in the U.S., University of Illinois
Yeah.
Urbana-Champaign, and that we talked about that. You know, here the European Union is concerned about, oh, well, these North African nations aren't democratic enough. Well, that class was just so interesting because the professor pointed out that one, citizens are more concerned with meeting their everyday needs. They're not going to be concerned about democratization process, and that's
Mhm.
what we're seeing in North Africa right now. And unfortunately, you know, Tunisia was considered for many years after the Arab Spring to be the only successful democracy, but now it's running into a lot of issues, and that's partially because of the economic issues the nation's facing again, where uh, it's hard for people to meet their everyday needs, well, democracy gets put on the back burner, and that's the issue where if European Union doesn't look to increase trade, increase relations, which would help it in order to deal with the migration crisis,
Mhm.
but also just with the fact that North Africa is the EU's southern neighbors, and until they develop more economically, how are you going to expect them to develop as democracies then? Oh,
And regarding this subject, I will recommend you and to our followers a very inspiring book, La Speranza Africana. It's in Italian, a book wrote by Federico Rampini, and if you are curious, you can see the Italian perspective over the African continent. But Nick, I'd like to move a little bit forward
yeah.
because our next subject today delves into the rich and intricate tapestry of the Christian cultural heritage of Europe. This topic, it's not just a matter of historical interest, but a living aspect of European identity that continues to shape our societies, our politics, and cultural experience. Europe's Christian heritage, spanning centuries, has left an indelible mark on the continent's art, architecture, literature, and social norms. And from the grand cathedrals that dominate city skylines to the timeless words of art inspired by Christian themes, the heritage it's a cornerstone of European culture. And your extensive background in European studies makes you the perfect guide for this exploration, for this discussion. The influence of Christianity on Europe, it's undeniable, but in today's increasingly secular and the diverse society, its role it's evolving. We will explore. I would like to explore how this heritage is being preserved, adapted, and reinterpreted in contemporary Europe. It's a topic that um, um, invest reflection on how historical legacy can coexist with modern values and the ongoing process of cultural integration. And to start, we will discuss the historical significance of Christian heritage in Europe. How has Christianity shaped the development of European nations and their identities?
Well, you know, that's the interesting thing where as much as we could try to say that, oh, we're secular nations, we have to admit that Christianity inspired a lot of our political systems. The fact of our beliefs about what should be considered just and unjust in a society. We based our laws a lot off of Christianity. And, you know, so it's a bit laughable when people just try to ignore that or say, oh, we're secular. You know, especially when people try to say that in Italy. And it's like, well, sure, you could say you are legally a secular nation, but you look at Italy and so much of the art, the culture, the political system itself, where do they all come from? Christianity. So it's a bit amusing to try to say, oh, no, no, we're secular nations. Yes, but you got your beliefs from Christianity. And that's definitely where we see the divergence with Europe and other nations. So, for example, when we look at other ones where it's a bit more strict because it's inspired by Islam and some of the nations inspired then by Sharia law, where, well, okay, but you know, where we just see it, where it's constantly inspired. We see the role of religion in politics. You see a few nations where they try to stamp that out, such as in the Soviet Union or China, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily always last long. And that's why it's interesting looking at former Soviet Union member states and that are now in Central Europe. So looking at Romania, Poland, and just looking at how, in reality, when other nations you're starting to see the rate of believers, for lack of a better term, falling, you're seeing it increasing in these Eastern EU member states. But at the same time, I would definitely also say the same is happening in the future generations and looking at other member states, even in the West. And I think people need to stop raising the alarm bells as much. So, for example, thinking back, in case anyone spends too much time on social media like I do, a common trend on Instagram was showing different videos, showing a nation such as France or Germany, and showing the number of Christians falling and leading to comments, oh, well, Europe's lost. But at the same time, part of the issue is such as looking at, for example, at Germany. In Germany, while minority religions don't have to pay a tax automatically if they register their religious affiliation with the government. You do as a Christian in Germany. So, of course, you're going to, it looks like there's much more practicing, that there's increasing number of Muslims in Germany, while there's a decrease in Christians in Germany. And this is simply because Muslims don't have to automatically pay a tax to the mosques in Germany, while you would if you registered with the German government. So a lot of Christians have realized, well, okay, this isn't that important to me to register my faith with the German government. So they'll just, you know, register unaffiliated, but they're still going to church. They're still donating maybe some money every mass, but, you know, it's more under what their discretion is rather than based off of what the German government mandates that tax to be if you declare yourself a Christian. And, you know, not only in Germany, but other Northern European nations. So I think people need to stop this mass hysteria thinking, oh, it's the end, and just realize that. And then also just looking at the birth rates and looking at the reality that while birth rates are falling in Europe, I think we are going to actually, well, we are already seeing where the younger people are more conservative. Look at the past EU elections with how many allegedly were far right. You know, that's the media's favorite term, trying to make anybody who's a little right-wing, automatically they're an extremist if they don't go along with what the media considers acceptable. But it definitely sees that the younger generation probably will lean more religious once again because people who are more religious also are having more kids than those who aren't. So it's interesting seeing that. I think people just need to realize that with so many things, we go through different cycles, and now we're going through the cycle where you had an increasing number of people who were non-believers, but now we're swinging backwards. Where now you're going to have a higher portion of people who do believe. Once again, and looking at the fact that it's the more religious people who are having kids, the more religious people who tend to believe that it's important to raise a child. So, for example, um, when you look at different groups in Europe, it's just like the United States. Well, okay, who tends to be more determined to raise a child, whether it was born out of wedlock or not? Uh, Religious people or those who believe in pro-choice, who also then are either atheists or just, you know, they're just not. Come on, it's the religious people where it's more, well, okay, that's human life. Now let's raise it.
Yeah, of course.
So
Also, for me, I I really think that in contemporary Europe, Christianity continues to play a vital role in
yes.
shaping both individual lives and social structures. And while the region has become increasingly diverse in terms of religious beliefs and worldviews, Christianity remains a significant culture and
Well,
history.
and not only that, but it's the fact that, these are a significant portion of the sites that
Uh-huh.
people go to. I mean, it's not rare for you to go inside a church, especially if it's more renowned for possibly the architecture or style or an event that was alleged to have occurred there, that you go in and you're not just seeing your Christian Europeans, you're seeing also I also Muslims then visiting these sites because of how it's considered to be important as well. So
Yeah.
that's why it's also interesting thinking now to Romania, where there was some criticism of the government. You tell me if it's strong criticism within, but I know outsiders, particular, but also to be fair, I mean, this was on Reddit, where a lot of these Reddit users aren't religious, don't believe, think religion's a waste of time. Oh, well, why should Romania be so concerned with building, uh, forgive me, oh, what's the term? Cathedral, basilica?
It's a cathedral.
Okay, how it's going to be. It's going to dominate then the Bucharest skyline.
Hmm.
And as a lot of people point out, well, religious sites are a major source of tourism in Europe. So, and also it was interesting when Romanians were pointing out the history and saying that this was a way of Romania able to reclaim its nation. What
Hmm.
people tend to forget is that the communist regime in in Central and Eastern Europe were awful, where they would just knock down churches in the name of, well, let's just put up Soviet bloc housing here and knock down whatever was there. While this is almost a way of reclaiming, especially looking at that Romania is one of the most religious nations in not only the EU but in Europe, where by number of believers.
Yeah, but I'm so proud of that because Christianity also influenced social justice movements and charitable endeavors and advocacy for human rights. And inspired by the teachings of Jesus Christ on love, compassion, and justice, many Christians in Romania and in Europe are actively involved in addressing issues such as poverty, inequality, and discrimination. And from running soup kitchens to advocating for refugees' rights, Christian individuals and organizations continue to make a positive impact on their communities and beyond. And this is very important.
Well, not only that, but it's also unfair where some of the criticism too was trying to say, oh, but this is just a waste of money. It needs to build schools and hospitals instead, acting as
Hmm.
if Romania also isn't investing in other areas. I mean, well, yes, Romania is spending a significant amount, like what, around 300 billion euros, but at the same time, uh, it's investing in everything else as well. Romania's economy is growing very quickly, where it's a little insulting for people to try to act like, oh yeah, Romania's not spending on everything else. It's just spending on the cathedral and that's it, which isn't the reality. But part of the issue is it just seems that with so many Europeans, they still have this backward belief where everybody believes that um, and okay, and this leads to the argument. So, for example, you tell me,
Yeah,
where do you consider Romania to be located in Europe? So, for example,
myself.
you have Southern Europe, Western Europe,
We are part of the southeastern Europe.
Southeastern. Okay,
Uh,
just curious.
Yes, yeah. This is my opinion. Even if our politicians and our civil society are trying to push Romania in the Central Europe, we are not part of
Okay,
the
that's what the
Central
answer
Europe.
I was looking for.
Yeah.
But part of the issue is it's not necessarily, and that's, but part of the issue is because of arrogant Western Europeans, arrogant Americans who uh, really sullied the term Eastern Europe, where it's become almost a slur. Just thinking
Hmm.
of, oh, backwards nations, where nothing's going for them. But, you can actually come to nations that are for Western Europeans or Americans considered part of Eastern Europe. So right now, for example, anyone doesn't realize I'm in Poland for my period abroad for the PhD. And wow, it's incredible what I'm seeing where, I'm supposed to be in one of the poorest parts of Poland, and yet different socioeconomic problems that are very
Hmm.
widespread in the United States, France, Germany, Italy. I don't necessarily see here. I don't see the large homeless issue
Yeah.
where there's more emphasis than with building enough housing and doing what's necessary in order to get the housing approved, while it takes forever in Western Europe with this lagging bureaucracy where Eastern former members of Eastern Europe, where now they prefer to be considered Central Europe. There's been such an effort on these bureaucratic reforms to really increase and improve the process to allow projects that need to get done, while we're just at a loss in Western Europe, and it's just interesting
Hmm.
where it just definitely exceeds all expectations. So for example, with this too, the fact that it's in southeastern Poland, near the Ukrainian border. Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's so dangerous. And it's like, okay, but Poland's a NATO member state. It's part of the EU. And this will lead into our other topic about NATO.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that necessarily that easy to attack this part of Poland and just have everyone forget about it. We would have a mandated response, but and hopefully it changes where people hopefully it changes where more people will be encouraged to visit Central and Eastern European nations and see for
Hmm.
themselves the reality that uh, there's a huge improvement. But for now, until people actually come and see for themselves, you're going to have these bizarre stereotypes existing. And it might actually help, though, where you're actually going to start seeing Central and Eastern European nations blowing by the West, where the West keeps on stagnating, not resolving these issues and these necessary bureaucratic reforms, while that's not the case in Central and Eastern Europe. So, for
Hmm.
example, when people complain about the immigration process in different member states, it
Okay.
actually came to my attention that in Germany, you need to fax documents. And it's like, why is faxing uh a requirement still, rather than just giving the documents in person. Because that's the thing. People are annoyed saying, well, wait a minute,
Hmm.
we have an in-person appointment. And then we're told, instead of emailing, sending a digital copy, oh, now you have to fax these documents. I mean, that's not part of the process in Poland.
Yeah.
That's not part of the process even in Italy, where people try to criticize Italy as for its heavy bureaucracy. And you tell me, but I'm sure that's not part of the process either in Romania for people interested in working. Oh yeah, go fax these forms.
Yeah.
But it's at the same time though, in some nations like France, they definitely have to do more to preserve their Christian heritage. I mean, it's definitely where, and Le Pen's definitely right, where we're seeing a large number of foreigners who do not want to accept and respect French values.
Hmm.
And it's no coincidence that as immigration increases in France, that we keep on seeing more and more French churches having fires. And we, you see where some media tries to just swipe it under the rug, but at the same time, it's like, oh, come on, this isn't coincidental that historic churches keep on suffering major damage. And this was even seen in Italy. And luckily, in the case in Italy, it was caught on proof. It was a Moroccan Muslim man who burned a church near Milan. And it's also important for European governments to take action and say, well, hey, it's one, yes, technically we're legally secular.
Hmm.
So it's not that you have to convert to be Christian, but you have to respect the Christian heritage in these nations. If you're going to attack churches, then the European Union has to be more forward and say, well, we're going to deport you. But for any viewers who don't necessarily know yet, part of the problem is in many in EU member states,
Yeah.
is that they're not wanting to deport criminals back to their nations of origin because they're concerned, oh, well, they might face repercussions there. And what do we care? If
Yeah,
they
and
are
I have a
threatening and
problem.
damaging Europe, why allow them to stay?
Yeah, of course, but I have the problem also with the removal of the Christian cross in certain location to promote some social events like I don't know, like the Olympic Games in France or from packaging. Has this aspect has sparked considerable controversy and debates, and critics like me can argue that this trend represents a broader attempt to secularize public space and diminish the visibility of Christian symbols, which have been integral to European culture
Well,
and
yeah, and you
history.
tell me if you remember the name of the church, but that was definitely highly offensive that the French Olympic Committee decided to remove the cross from the poster, where
Yeah,
it's a famous landmark because it's a historic church, and yet here in the poster they removed the cross.
yeah, I truly believe, sorry, Nick, but I truly believe that religion and religious practice are something personal. But come on, but I will not advocate for involved church in the domestic state politics, but I have the right to promote my values in Europe.
Well, yes, and that was the other issue. So, for example, if anyone doesn't remember, there was a scandal in Italy where before Muslim leaders were coming to Italy, they covered up statues
Oh
with
yeah,
blankets because, oh, well, they're not. If it's that offensive, then don't come to Italy. This is Italian culture. I
and
mean, and at the same time, it's absolutely 100% acceptable for Muslim nations to say the same. Hey, this is our culture. We have mosque here. You have to respect it or don't come. And
and
that's the
this is
thing,
happening.
because would we really have, I don't really believe that when we do have Olympic Games in a Muslim majority nation, I really don't think that they're going to be concerned with removing, you know, the minarets from a mosque if it
Yeah,
happens to be in the skyline for an advertisement. Why not? That's part of that culture, and that what makes it unique in order to draw tourism. Why
and
would you remove it from the poster?
Yeah, and all those things are happening while we are talking about multiculturalism in the European Union. But because you touch during your analyze, you touch a very important subject, NATO. Our final subject for today centers on the upcoming NATO summit and a very important event that will address the pressing security and strategic challenges facing the alliance. NATO, the cornerstone of collective defense in the transatlantic area, it's navigating a complex global landscape marked by rising geopolitical tensions and a very complex relation with the Russian Federation. And this summit, it's particularly significant because as it will set the strategic direction for the alliance in the coming years, focusing on issues such as defense spending, cybersecurity, and the response to emerging threats like the war in Ukraine. And one of the most closely watched aspects of this summit is the race for the election of the new head of NATO. The leadership role is crucial. We know that as the Secretary General sets the agenda and represents the alliance on the global stage, the competition has been notably intense, with significant figures vying for the position. Among the candidates were President Klaus Johannes of Romania and the Dutchman Mark Rutte, each bringing distinct backgrounds and vision for NATO futures. And the outcome of this race will influence the strategic direction of the alliance and its ability to respond to global challenges. Nick, give your expertise in international relations and European affairs. We are eager to hear your short analysis on this leadership race, and how did the candidates of President Johannes and Mark Rutte differ in terms of their strategic priorities and visions for NATO?
It just seems like there's a bit of back and forth on what to do with NATO, where, you had where the Slovak government was real big, where it kept on beating the drum recently that
Okay.
no, we cannot have NATO troops marching on the ground in Ukraine, which, to be brutally honest, I know I might get backlash, but at the same time, I honestly think that's the smartest thing. I don't necessarily know if it would be a wise move for NATO to send troops to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we really want cause a situation where then just Russia gets overly desperate and just starts attacking different cities across Europe? I mean, we see with how they have no regard for where they target it in Ukraine. They constantly just do whatever they want to further their agenda. But, it'll be hard to say, hopefully they commit to that, because it was already announced that NATO already tried to come out and say, oh, no, we're not going to send troops, which probably would be the smarter thing. Especially with so many domestic issues that NATO members have to resolve.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, while it's not talked about as much, NATO definitely has to deal with Hungary and Turkey and discipline them as members. The fact that they didn't want to let in Finland and Sweden at first for bizarre reasons. And definitely the loyalty of Turkey in particular has to be questioned, where, the fact that Turkey wants to clamp down on minorities within Turkey, that's not appropriate to try to blackmail Sweden into forcefully turning people over, because trying to claim that anybody who doesn't agree with Erdogan agree with mainstream Turkish identity and
Mm-hmm.
religion and language, oh, well, that makes them a terrorist. Oh, come on. And unfortunately, that's become the Turkish stance. And it also kind of has to be discussed that, everyone constantly loves to discuss and criticize the United States for its wrongful actions in the Middle East. But look at Turkey. It keeps on bombing the Kurds in Iraq and Syria. And where's the media? Where's the outrage? It's nowhere to be found. All these videos where an evidence just, nope, gets hidden behind the carpet. And here it is, a member of NATO. Well, okay, but should this really be considered acceptable behavior?
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely don't think that it should automatically be kicked out, but at the same time, we shouldn't allow member states to behave in this way and try to say, oh, well, the US took some really bad action, so that allows us to do what we want and to just bomb the Kurds like we like. Come on. But I definitely have to throw in a sarcastic comment with regards to Russia. With what happened in Dagestan,
Mm-hmm.
and that I guess a nation could invade Russia for the sake of fighting Islamic terrorism. The fact that here Russia uses the excuse, oh well, we invaded Ukraine to fight Nazism. Well, apparently someone needs to invade Russia now to combat Islamic terrorism because this is the second incident that they've had now within a year. And this, with well, not only that, but no, actually, this is the third incident where, yes, that incident didn't result in deaths, but remember
Yeah,
at
you're
the
right.
airport where they were trying to hunt down Jews. Okay, you want to talk about Nazism in Ukraine, which there is no significant evidence of this. Let's get that clear. It's we know it's a facade for for Russia to just invade Ukraine as it wants, but look at what's going on in Russia and how they can't even control their own domestic issues. And okay, well, what are they going to withdraw from Ukraine to do with their own domestic matters? And it almost looks like that now you're having people in Russia realize that because it's so occupied with Ukraine, meaning the government and the army, that now you're just having these radicals do whatever they want within Russia because there's not as much, there's not the resources to deal with this swiftly. And that's unfortunately going to make where NATO has to be on the lookout for this and look on the lookout for people trying to come. Sorry,
Don't worry.
come from Russia and potentially cause havoc in NATO member states.
Yeah, and because it is very important for us, for the Romanians to understand what really happened with the race for NATO leadership. I like to discuss a little bit a specific aspect of President Iohannis' campaign. Because despite his strong credentials and despite the support from several member states, he ultimately did not secure the leadership position. What do you think President Iohannis missed in this race for NATO leadership?
He's from Romania. He's not from a Western European nation. Sorry
Yeah,
to be
but
blunt like that.
we are close. Yeah, but we are much closer to the conflict in Ukraine.
Oh, I know, and I'm not saying. Are you kidding? If it was my personal choice, I
Yeah,
would have chosen
okay.
him over Root. So when I said that about him being Romania, I don't mean that my personal belief, but unfortunately, that's how it still goes in these organizations like NATO and the European Union,
Mm-hmm.
where you still have everyone trying to have it where leadership is still concentrated in Northwestern Europe. So not Spain or Italy even, but the countries like Netherlands or Germany, which have a lot of domestic issues themselves, are far from perfect, but they constantly want to be in the leadership position and have everyone follow them like sheep. And that's part of the issue that even though Root was not necessarily a very effective leader in the Netherlands, there's a lot. The fact that now look at how much politics have shifted in the Netherlands. Uh, it's like, what qualifies him then? I mean, it's not like he's leading a prosperous nation to the next government. It's basically just, well, oh, I'm a Western European, and that's what should put me in that position, even though, as you mentioned, the fact that Romania is closer, the fact that Romania likely has a better relationship with Ukraine than the Netherlands, it would make more sense to have with the Romanian president than having that leadership role in NATO rather than giving it to Rutte. And that's just, but that's the issue that we need to break out of this thing, because even if we look at the European Union, so for example, looking with Ukraine, it was a lot of times Poland or Lithuania dragging Germany by the nose. Okay, Germany, stop dragging your feet with acting with Ukraine. Chop, chop. We have to make decisions. This is an active war because, we're, because, it almost goes back where it unfortunately goes back to German culture where you're almost expected to schedule things and everything needs to be precise. And it's like, well, okay, this is a war. There's unexpected things that pop up. You can't just schedule this in your calendar and deal with it months later, which is almost what Germany wanted to do. And it's like, well, this is a war that is ongoing, and now it's going past 2 years. And it definitely see where you see Eastern EU member states more on the ball, have welcomed a lot of refugees from Ukraine, while other member states don't really know how to act. And how many of these Western EU nations have this belief that, oh, well, Ukraine just has to have a peace agreement with Russia. Why? So then Russia could come back 8 years later. It's because if people don't forget, it invaded in 2014, then in 2022 invades again. What, in 2030 it'll invade again and say, you know what, we want more land because you have a Nazi problem. This is this is another special military operation. And that's the issue that I don't know if the belief was that they were concerned if Romania would try to expedite Ukraine NATO admission. But at the same time, I just don't have much faith in him with leading NATO, because there's a lot of issues, as we've discussed, that need to be resolved. The issue with Hungary and Turkey being rogue member states, the fact that you have this war on NATO's footsteps in Ukraine, and Rutte left so many domestic issues in his own nation. I don't necessarily see him qualified to then take over this leadership role with NATO, especially with the fact that he is much further than Romania to the Ukrainian war. And I've never really heard of him having a strong relationship with Zelensky to then be able to help navigate the difficulties and be able to assist Ukraine as much as he could without dragging NATO in and possibly causing the situation to be far worse. And that's what I think people need to realize, is that it would not necessarily be beneficial to just put a bunch of NATO troops in Ukraine and think that this is going to be the end of the war, because part of the issue is that what people have to keep in mind, that while European nations are much more willing to accept when they make a mistake, we're dealing with Putin, who is not a democratic leader. Let's be realistic. He's a dictator. And part of the issue is that he's very similar with China and some other nations, where he has to save face. He has to pretend that he had a victory for Russia. And right now, he's not in that position because of how that he really hasn't made significant territorial gains in 2 years. They're at a stalemate, and this doesn't look good for Russia, because Russia wanted to brag about its military capacities. It was supposed to be one of the strongest armies, and yet it's not able to beat Ukraine. And part of the, and I don't know. I don't know if Rutte necessarily has the solutions to deal with leaders like that, who are interested in saving face and almost creating an out for him, creating an out for Putin to exit Ukraine and pretend he was successful nationally. And And then part of the issue that people also need to keep in mind too is that when people keep on bringing up NATO fighting Russia itself, they're under the belief that it would be better for Russia to be broken up into all the republics, into in the different in a bunch of different new nations.
But it's dangerous.
Yeah, it's like, okay, do you want to have Chechnya and Dagestan furthering Islamic terrorist attacks in the world? I mean, one day they're doing domestic attacks, then the next day they could be trying to do it on EU territory or NATO territory. This isn't going to be a good solution for everyone else to have Russia break up into these new nations that don't really know how to govern themselves, aren't necessarily interested in that. And let's be realistic, Dagestan and Chechnya, they just want to cause chaos. And unfortunately, because Putin is more concerned about trying to save face in this invasion of Ukraine, where he has to pretend that this is a just war, that he's fighting Nazism, well, it leads him to look away from areas of Russia like Chechnya and Dagestan, which need to be put in their place. Otherwise, things like this happen. And it's like, okay, but, do people want that? And for people who think I'm being a little too, that I'm exaggerating, look at the reality that with the US, with its open border, they found 8 people associated with ISIS from Tajikistan within the United States because they were able to enter through an open southern border. So how long does it take before you're going to have people from Dagestan, Chechnya doing the same? And the same, and look at, and then the issue too that the European Union also and NATO has look with how to rectify the weaponization of migrants by Russia, where they tried to flood Poland, Lithuania, Finland with illegal immigrants, and by just releasing them and trying to say, okay, go cross in those countries, to try to overwhelm nations with just a large number of people that these nations didn't vet with whether or not they should be allowed in, and just, okay, yeah, go cross them. And that could potentially grow even worse if NATO tries to attack a face-on, where Russia will get desperate, and what would not be considered appropriate conduct by NATO member states, EU member states, they kind of forget. Unfortunately, these nations forget that other nations like Russia do not act like them. Russia's not concerned about following the law. It's just going to do whatever it wants. And, and that's hopefully, that's also part of the issue with choosing route, where hopefully he doesn't get stuck in the thinking of, well, according to international law, because for anyone who doesn't remember, International Criminal Court with the Hague, that's in the Netherlands. So hopefully he doesn't get stuck into this thing and realize that when you're dealing with someone like Putin, unfortunately, sometimes you have to go low, where you have to learn that you have to be intimidating back. You cannot just go like, well, based off of international law, this is not acceptable. Okay, it's Putin. He doesn't care. Putin would take an international law book, laugh in your face while he's lighting it on fire. And hopefully Root is prepared to deal with that. And that's part of the issue that different Western Europeans don't seem like because that even came up where it was, I'm trying not to go too much on a tangent, but
no, you're right.
So many people in the West are so used to following the law that, well, it doesn't matter if someone else breaks the law, you should follow too. Because there was an example from Chicago that someone was mad that they got in, that people were mad that they brought their dog on a train, and and this person mentioned there's someone smoking a crack pipe 5 meters away from me, and you're focused on my dog being on the train while someone's doing illegal drugs, which is dangerous also because other people could be inhaling the fumes on an enclosed space stuck underground on the subway. And people are concerned, oh, well, you shouldn't have the dog. And it was kind of horrific seeing all these Chicagoans commenting saying, well, yeah, how could you bring the dog? And they're just forgetting about the crack pipe. Or then people tried to say that, oh, you made that up to justify it. There's people being murdered in broad daylight in Chicago. Let's not
Yeah.
pretend that people aren't against breaking the laws now. And, and that's also part of the issue that which Root didn't necessarily seem capable of dealing with in the Netherlands. That you have, unfortunately, some immigrants, odds are, similar to Italy, it's people who entered illegally, not the ones who are obeying the law, did all this paperwork to enter the Netherlands because they wanted the chance to work in the Netherlands, contribute to Dutch society. These are your people who just enter Europe illegally with no regard for the law and then continue to commit crimes. And if Root wasn't capable of dealing with that, where now, they're crying because the far right got elected. Well, what
Mhm.
do you think is going to happen? It's worrying then for the future of NATO because he has to learn to be more bold. Where it's like, and let me be clear. I'm not saying that he has to just go crazy and start attacking Russia. Obviously not, but he has to be prepared to get in Putin's face. He has to
Mhm.
be prepared to not back down easily, and learn that he has to be intimidating back because he's dealing with a bully. Putin thinks that he can bully other nations in order to get what he wants, and Root has to be prepared to get in his face and say absolutely not.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Nicholas Zalewski, thank you very much for your expertise and thoughtful analysis. We extend our sincere thanks for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. To our viewers and listeners, we encourage you to stay engaged with the EU Spectator by subscribing to our channels on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on our latest episodes and continue to explore the ever-evolving landscape of European affairs alongside us. Your support fuels our commitment to delivering informative and thought-provoking content that sheds lights on the crucial issues shaping the EU and beyond. As we look ahead, we remain committed to bringing you more in-depth discussion and explore insights into the political, socio-economic, and cultural dynamics shaping European and its global partnerships. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to having you with us again on the EU Spectator. Thank you very
Remember to
much, Nick.
subscribe, to comment, to like, to share the video. Say you hated everything I said. Say I go off on too many tangents. Comment with your
Yeah,
feedback.
say everything. Thank you very much, Nick.
Oh, actually, here's the idea. Comment the flag of who you preferred to lead NATO, Romania or the Dutch flag.
Or the Dutch. Yeah, yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Nick.